All right, everybody, a special treat for you today. I have the man, the myth, the legend, the one and only Mr. Jingles. Do you want me to address you by Paul, Mr. Jingles, Jingles? How do you want that to go?
I'm okay with the mighty one, or your royal gnome ship, whatever's.
The mighty one. I like that. All right, we'll go
Paul
with
is
the mighty
fine.
one. Paul's fine. No, I like the mighty one. It's
Okay.
very nice. So let's get started with just a couple get to know you questions. Even though I know the majority of people out here probably do know you by now. You have what, 1 million, 2 million followers? That's what you need to get captain.
Yeah, at the minute I'm approaching 600,000, but they won't put me into World of Warships until I achieve 2 million. So a few more months and I'll be there.
So do you hear that, everyone? We want to get Jingles in game, so you have to have your family, your extended family, sub to him right now, because I really want to see you in the game for some reason. That would be pretty cool.
Yeah, you need to get out there and make YouTube accounts for all of your pets and have them subscribe.
Exactly. You'll soon have 2 dogs or 2 cats and a dog following you. So what part of England do you live in?
Well, I'm originally from Newcastle upon Tyne, which is in the northeast of England. I'm not sure if you're aware of the people from that part of the country are called Geordies. I'm not sure if you're aware of what the accent sounds like. It doesn't sound anything like the way I sound because I haven't lived there for so long. But when I was 12 years old, we emigrated to South Africa, and then after a year we moved to Swaziland. But then I went to boarding school in South Africa, and then in 1986, we came back to England, back to Newcastle upon Tyne, and then 3 years later I joined the Navy, and then I was surrounded by people who had all different kinds of accents. I just don't sound like a Geordie anymore. If you did hear a Geordie talking, you wouldn't understand a word they were saying. So it's probably good that I don't still have my original accent. But right now, because I was in the Navy, I live in or around the city of Portsmouth, which is where most of the Royal Navy are based these days.
Okay, so now I am kind of detecting a little bit of that South African accent in there. Now that you mention it, so
now that I've mentioned it, I sound a little bit like a South African. Is that right?
yeah, just a little bit. So no, it's funny because I lived in England for 3 years in the '80s because my dad was in the U.S. service, and when I moved to England, the kids over there thought I had a speech impediment, and I picked up a British accent pretty quickly, moved back home to the States, and going into 2nd grade here, kids in the U.S. thought I had a speech impediment. So it was kind of a rough childhood for me, actually.
I've experienced almost exactly the same thing. Nobody could understand a word I was saying when I first moved to South Africa. I came back to England from South Africa. Apparently, if you take a Geordie accent and you cross it with a South African accent, everybody thought I was Australian. So, yeah. We had an American exchange student in South Africa, by the way. Just remembered his name was Paul Kundinger. He was from somewhere in Michigan. I can't remember exactly well. Really nice guy. Although there were some real hilarious cultural differences. In the USA, a pencil eraser is called a pencil eraser. In England and South Africa, it's called a rubber. And that means something entirely different in the USA.
Very, very much.
So when you're sitting there in English class and somebody yells, "Does anybody have a rubber I can borrow?" The American exchange student doesn't know where to look.
He's like, "What? What was that?"
Yeah.
Yeah, there are differences. Cigarettes are called something else that I'm not going to mention here.
Probably best not to.
No, probably best not to. But
fanny as well. In the USA, your fanny's your backside, isn't it?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, not over here. It's in the same rough location, but more to the front and female only.
Yep, gotcha. We won't go there either.
No, let's not.
So, how do you start your mornings off?
Oh, I prefer not to. I'm no good to anybody in the morning. I don't know how I survived 22 years in the Navy, having to be up by 7, on board a ship, and at work by 8. The Navy do that by
7?
Yeah,
7 o'clock.
Yeah,
wow, you Navy guys are spoiled. I think our start time in the Army is 4 a.m. usually.
Yeah, we didn't have to go to PT before going to breakfast.
Yeah,
But
breakfast is important, right? That's the most important thing.
But we had kind of weird working hours in the Navy. It wasn't 9 to 5. We'd do 8 till 4 instead, for a very, very good reason. Because when you're alongside in Portsmouth, when you're in the naval base, if you finish at 4, you can be out and home before the rush hour traffic, so that's why we did it that way.
Very, very nice. So the funny thing about most U.S. bases here, you're not avoiding rush hour at 4 because rush hour starts on post at 4, and you can't get off for like half an hour. But very, very interesting.
Well, that's one of the things I've noticed about U.S. Army, Navy, and Air Force bases. You never need to leave the post.
No,
Everything.
No, they're cities.
Yeah, it's a little piece of the USA right there.
Yep.
I think it was a naval air station at Sigonella in Cyprus, which was Royal Air Force, but which was leased to the USA. It was great because the second you got through the gate, you had to change the side of the road you were driving on. There are cheerleaders walking to and from school and cheer practice. There's a Wendy's. There's absolutely everything. All the signs, everything. You've gone from, Cypriot to the USA, downtown, midtown USA. The second you cross that post boundary, it was amazing.
Yeah, you all can't quite colonize like we can Americanize. I guess.
That's true.
So what keeps you up at night?
Quite literally, our cats. We've got 2. One of them is.
I have empathy for you. Empathy for you.
We've got 2 cats. One of them's called Crystalline. These are Rita's cats. Right? She named the first one Crystalline. That's her oldest. And also this tiny little sort of tortoiseshell black thing. And she named her after the crystalline entity from Star Trek because she's a massive nerd. The second cat, which is the youngest one by a year, but is about 3 times the size of the oldest cat, is called Chewbacca. But because of the way Rita pronounces it, it's Chewbacca, or just So Juicy she's good as gold. She's really affectionate. There's not a mean bone in her body. Crystalline is evil. And
there's always one. There's always one.
We can't let Crystalline into the bedroom at night because she will do bad things. But we let Zhu come in because she's a little angel. But Zhu has a nasty habit of deciding, okay, I've had enough of being in the bedroom now. Now I want to get out. And she starts scratching at the door. So you have to get up at 3 a.m. to let her out of the bedroom, shut the door, back into bed, and 20 minutes later she wants to get back in again, and she's scratching at the door. And so, quite literally, the cats keep us awake at night.
Yeah, we have that going on too. We've got 2 cats. One black cat that, if you stop petting him, he will actually grab your hand with his claws and drag your hand towards him.
Yeah, I didn't give you permission to stop.
At nighttime, he is just constantly meow, and it's like, man, it's 1 o'clock. What do you want? The dog is perfect. She just goes to bed. Yeah, but the cats are something else.
Yeah, so. Dogs are no problem, but cats can be very demanding.
Yes, they can, and they can also be very independent. It's like, all right, you want me 1 second, and the next second, it's like I'm nothing to you. So.
Yeah.
All right. Here's an interesting one. What time period in history would you most like to visit if you had the ability to time travel? And you might have that ability already because you are the mighty one. So.
Yeah. I actually had a good think about this one because everybody says, "Oh, I'd like to go back to D-Day," or "I'd like to go back to the Battle of Waterloo," or this or that. Here's the problem with all of the really interesting periods in history. They're bloody dangerous.
Yeah, they're violent. They're very violent.
Yeah. Millions of people tend to die at the most interesting parts of history. I honestly think that right now is the best time to be alive. You look at how fast science has progressed in the last 50 years alone. And how quickly technologies that we thought were going to be along forever have just been rendered completely obsolete. Like, who owns a VCR these days? When was the last time you saw anything on videotape?
I don't think kids now know what a videotape is even.
Yeah. Even CDs, CD-ROMs. When was the last time you got a physical boxed copy of a game when you can just download it on Steam? Good old games.
It's been ages.
Yeah. So I think right now is probably the best time to be alive. Although, while thinking about this question, I was reminded of a short story that I read a long time ago, maybe 30 years ago. It was in a collection of science fiction stories that I was reading as a kid. And it was about time travel. And it's I'll just tell you the story. The idea was that time travel was in the far future, time travel was so commonplace that you could get time travel packaged to us. So you could go back and view, exactly the question that you asked. You could go back and have a guided tour of these pivotal moments in history. But everybody could see you, so it was very important that you tried to blend in. You didn't do anything to upset, history.
Yeah.
And one of the most popular package tours was to go back and see the crucifixion. So everybody had to, strap themselves into computers and speed learn ancient Hebrew and so on and so on. They were dressed accordingly to make sure they didn't stand out from the crowd. And the story followed this family who were going back on a package tour to see the crucifixion. So they're there on the hill of Calvary, and Jesus is there nailed to the cross. Actually, no, sorry, not. I'm getting slightly ahead of myself. The package tour itself started off with Pontius Pilate saying, "Okay, I'm going to free a prisoner. Who's it going to be? You've got this Jesus fella, you've got this Barnabas fella, and so on and so on." And of course,
and poor Brian.
Yeah, poor Brian. And of course, everybody had been told, remember, when you get to this part, you have to shout, crucify Jesus, because that's what actually happened. And so when Pontius Pilate asks them, who should be crucified and who should be freed, everybody starts shouting, crucify Jesus, crucify Jesus. And then as the guy's looking around the crowd, he starts recognizing people. And the entire crowd, there wasn't a single Jew there. Everybody in the crowd calling for Jesus to be crucified was a member of the time travel package tour who'd gone back to witness the whole event. So, yeah, little story there. I thought I'd share.
It almost sounded like a Heinlein story at first.
I think it may have been. It was in the sort of there was a publishing company that may still be around called Golanx.
Okay.
Who did a ton of science fiction stuff in the golden and silver age, 50s and 60s. So this was an old story, but I read it like in the 70s.
Yeah, time for the Stars is another one that kind of sticks out. That's a good book. So. All right, let's move on to some gaming-related questions now. We'll start with the basics right here. What game really got you into gaming? What's that one game that will always stand out in your mind as, hey, it's because of this game that I'm here right now?
Have you ever heard of a game called Shadow of the Beast? Might be going back a bit.
Yes and maybe no. It sounds familiar, but...
There was a home computer system called the Commodore Amiga. They were big. Right back in the day, it was the Spectrum versus the VIC-20.
So this is like the predecessor to the Commodore 64 then?
Actually, this was the successor to the Commodore 64.
Because I actually had a Commodore 64. Hunt for Red Storm Rising was like my favorite game on that. Love that game.
Well, the Commodore Amiga 500 was the one that came out after the Commodore 64.
Okay, gotcha.
And that kind of was competing with the Atari ST. Now, I never had one. We were dirt poor when I was growing up, and I could never afford. My friends all had Spectrums and Commodore 64s, and you name it. And
oh God, I'm one of those. I'm the 1% now. I had a Commodore 64.
Yeah, I could just look on in envy. But when I joined the Navy, I suddenly had all this disposable income. I came back from the first Gulf War, which was my very first deployment, and I had a friend called Gary Dunn who gotten himself an Amiga 500, and he was playing this game called Shadow of the Beast, and it was a side-scrolling sort of, kind of like, do you remember Golden Axe?
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Yeah,
great game.
The arcade, kind of like that, but it had parallax scrolling. Now, for the younger viewers who don't know what that is, basically the background and the foreground scrolled at different speeds to give you a feeling of depth. And I'm watching them play this game, and I'm thinking, this is amazing. How much is one of these? I thought, no, I actually have that much money saved up from being deployed for 6 months. Went out and bought one, and I have not stopped playing computer games ever since.
You're probably like, wow, we are never going to have anything better than this game right now. This graphics is amazing. It's funny how that works.
Yeah. I mean, I can remember there was a big demo scene at the time. Usually the Scandinavians were writing demos of just bits of code. Not actual games or anything, just here's a cinematic that I put together. And you could order these demo discs in the post, 3.5-inch floppies. And this guy put together, it was a 3D rendered space battle. And I sat watching this thing over and over and over for hours. It was absolutely amazing. You watch this now, and it would look bad on a mobile phone.
Yeah, absolutely.
But at the time, it was groundbreaking graphics. I mean, do you remember when full motion video first came in? I don't know.
Oh yeah, when it was Wing Commander 3, I think was really kind of at the forefront of that. And looking back at that game, I mean, it had an all-star cast. I mean, you had Mark Hamill, you've got Biff Tannen, Roddy Mc. Yeah, I mean,
sorry, Malcolm McDowell, not Roddy.
Malcolm. Yeah, Malcolm. Different genre right there, close. Yeah. But no, it had an all-star cast, and you had the full motion video. You had a little bit of the choose your own scenario element to it, and I'm just like, this is amazing. It's like, where do you go from here? And now, of course, it seems like those type of games have kind of moved on. They're not as popular anymore. But
there was the whole interactive movie thing that came out, and it was because of the introduction of CD-ROM drives. Suddenly, I mean, games were starting to get quite big. Sometimes they took up as much as 20 megabytes on your hard drive.
Oh, I know, it's crazy. I think Wing Commander 4 was 6 CDs, which it's like 6 CDs. Holy moly!
It was ridiculous. But they were starting to come on like 8 or 9 floppy disks, and then suddenly CD-ROMs. And they're like, oh, we can fit all of this on the CD, but we only filled 10% of the CD. What else can we put on it? Some genius said full motion video.
Yeah.
And so all these games started coming out. They were basically just like, do you remember those old Ian Jackson Choose Your Own Adventure books?
Yep.
Like,
oh, yeah.
If you open the door, go to page 120, and if you decide to run, and that's basically all they were. Oh, there were some terrible games. Terrible games coming out in that period of time. And the other issue that I had, do you remember X-Wing and TIE Fighter?
Oh, yes. I love those games.
Yeah, with the MIDI soundtrack. That actually reacted to the action flawlessly. Yep. It's like the Star Wars theme would be blaring out of the speakers, and then suddenly another group of TIE fighters would jump in, and the music would seeg faultlessly into the Imperial March. So you didn't even need to be paying attention to your radar. You knew reinforcements had arrived just from what the music was doing.
You are taking me back.
Yeah. Well, they remastered that for CD to give it cinematic orchestral quality soundtrack. And it sucked. It sucked because when it was just MIDI music, it would seeg faultlessly between the various different bits of soundtrack. But when they were having to spool it from a CD-ROM, you'd have to wait half a second for the CD to spin up. So you'd get these gaps in the music when you were playing. It was terrible. It was totally immersion breaking.
We've come a long way since then.
We have, yes.
Fortunately, very fortunately. So, another game-related question here, and kind of an interesting one. What game is your guilty pleasure? So, is there a game out there that you really don't like to admit that you actually play? Kind of like movies that I don't like to admit that I like. Which I really hate, but for some reason when it comes on, I keep watching it.
There's a game. Recently I've been really struggling to find games that work well in co-op, so I can play with Rita. And there are a few. Vermintide, for example, isn't bad, but she's way more into it than I am. And so she's much higher level than I am, which doesn't really matter in Vermintide, but yeah. There's one that she suggested. I'm almost embarrassed to say this. It's called Farm Together.
Okay. One of those type of games.
Yeah, it's basically a hugely detailed 3D chat room where you happen to run a farm. But it's not bad. It's as these things go. I'm certainly not going to be doing any videos of it.
Well, it's important because it gets you playing with her, and
exactly.
I'm sure it's a lot more relaxing than the other games that we tend to play, right?
It's completely stress-free. I mean, your crops don't fail or any of that. You don't have to worry. It's not like playing Farm Simulator 2015, where trying to get that bloody tractor to reverse the trailer into the barn is like, there's none of that. It's just a nice, relaxing. It's more about playing together with somebody than what you're actually doing.
Yeah, it's a conversation piece, I guess.
Yeah.
So, how did this whole YouTube thing come about?
Well, I'd like to say hard work and dedication and natural talent, but it was just more or less completely by accident. I never really set out to do the YouTube thing. When I retired from the Navy, which would have been in 2011, I was already putting some YouTube videos up. It was mostly because replay hosting services. I forget the name of the one, but before Wargaming officially supported replay hosting, there were third-party websites that did it for them. And there was one that I'd put all of my best games on that just went down overnight, lack of funding, and everything was lost. So I thought, well, if I record video rather than just uploading the raw replay files, I could upload the video to YouTube, and YouTube's never going to go down. Well, you never know, but it's not going to go down in the foreseeable future. And that's one way of preserving all my best gaming moments. So I started doing that, and then people started watching them. And then people were saying in the comments, you should put a commentary on these. I thought, oh, I don't know about that. And then eventually I started putting commentaries on them, and more people would turn up to watch them. And I'm saying more and more. We're not talking huge numbers of people here, just a couple of hundred. And it just, I don't know if it was just right time, right place, but it seemed to catch on. One thing that really helped was, believe it or not, War Thunder. Because at the time War Thunder came out, this was before they had tanks, it was aircraft only. I had around 12,000, 15,000 subscribers on YouTube, which isn't bad, but it's not huge.
Thanks.
But I was...
But, I'm kidding.
Yeah, but once you get to that stage on YouTube, you start getting included in their search algorithms. So if somebody else is watching a World of Tanks video, for example, and they're not subscribed to you, once they've watched another World of Tanks video, there's a good chance that you may also like to watch, at the end of that video, will include one of yours, because you've got the numbers to be included in that kind of search.
Kind of like a reverse snowball. Instead of going down the hill and getting larger, it's kind of going up and exploding larger.
Exactly. Well, at the time that happened, that's when War Thunder came out. So I started playing War Thunder. I loved War Thunder at first, not so much now. Not that I think it's a bad game, but it's a different kind of game, to World of Tanks. And I was bringing that pre-packaged 15,000 strong audience to War Thunder. And at the time, because I was getting in there early and putting videos of War Thunder up early, I was probably the biggest War Thunder YouTuber. And that helped draw in other people who were looking, what's this new War Thunder game? Who's doing videos on it? And of course, they're watching my War Thunder videos, and they're subscribing for War Thunder, and then they're looking, what other videos has this guy put up? And they saw World of Tanks, and then they started playing World of Tanks as well. So I had that draw coming in from both different sides of the audience, and my numbers just took off.
Well, I'm sure your British South African accent helps too, right?
I'm sure it didn't hurt. I get that a lot, but that's
do you really?
From there. Oh, you'd be amazed, really. Yeah, I know. Who would have thought? But yes, that's pretty much the point where it just went, and I thought, you know what, I could actually do this for a living, and now I do.
You're like, hey, I'm retired from the Navy, and I got nothing else to do right now. Let's just go with this.
The timing was great, because it was around about the time when I was actually going to have to start getting a proper job after enjoying 6 months of being retired. The money was starting to run out. And I'm going to have to actually think about getting a job. But I've got my Navy pension, and there wasn't a huge amount of money coming in from YouTube, but it was enough to supplement the pension that I thought, I don't actually have to work. I can just keep doing this. And that's how it all started.
Very, very nice. You're living the dream. But it happened naturally, which is even cooler. So
yeah, I never had to try. It just happened.
It just happened. That's awesome, though. So speaking of the Navy and everything else, we'll move on to some more ship-related stuff and World of Warships proper. So it's obvious now that you were in the Navy. If you can or you want to describe just what you did in the Navy, and in any ships that you served on, if that was if you were surface warfare.
I basically answered I left school, didn't have a job, left school with terrible grades, and there's a local newspaper in Newcastle called the Evening Chronicle, and they were running fairly large adverts for Royal Navy radio operators. Now, that should have been a warning. If the Navy are advertising, if anybody, Navy, Army, Air Force, Marines, whatever, are advertising for a specific trade, with the benefit of experience now, I realise that it was because that trade sucks and nobody wants to do it. People are leaving because they've had enough.
That's probably
And I
why
thought,
that's probably why I was offered $10,000 as a bonus to join the infantry.
yep, exactly. Yeah. And they'd say, "Oh, look at all these sporting opportunities," and then they send you off to Afghanistan for 3 years.
Yeah.
Say, "Oh, no, you only do a year," and then at the end of the year, they extend you.
Yeah.
For another year, and then another year. Yeah. So anyway, that's basically why I joined the Navy as a radio operator, which isn't. People say radio operator, and they have this idea of some guy running around the battlefield with a Klansman or a PRC radio on the back. No. We've got much bigger radios on board ships, thanks. They're definitely not man-portable. So there was that. It was mostly tuning radios down in the communications office, but there was also voice communications work on the bridge, flashing light, Morse code, signal flags. I can't remember what it was called now, but there's station keeping, all that sort of stuff. But it really... I'm not saying it was a bad job, but I sucked at it. I really wasn't very good. And so after 5 years of that...
No, I didn't hear anything. How could you not hear that?
Yeah. So I applied. I thought, well, okay. Because you're familiar with watch keeping.
Yeah.
In the Army.
Fire watch, that type of thing.
At sea, generally, when you're in cruising watches and there's nothing really special going on, you're running a 1 in 3 watch keeping system. So the day's broken up into various different watches, starting in the morning, 8 a.m. The morning watch lasts until 12. From 12 until 4 is the afternoon watch. Between 4 and 6 is the first dog watch. 6 and 8 the second dog watch. Then you've got the first watch between 8 and midnight. And then you've got the long morning watch between midnight and 8 in the morning, and so on and so on. So in a 1 in 3 watch keeping system, let's say you're on watch in the the forenoon watch, 8 until 12. So you're on watch in the communications office for that 4-hour period. And then you get an hour off for your lunch, and then at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, you're not on watch, but it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon, it's the working day. So up you go to the upper deck, and you're chipping and painting and greasing guardrails and all that sort of rubbish. And then you're off at 4. But there's still another watch to go because you're 1 in 3. So in the dog watches, you don't have to go back on watch until 8, until midnight. But in the dog watches, it's evening rounds, so you've got to clean everything for that, and then you're going to have to get some food, and then suddenly you're on watch again. So you're actually working from 8 in the morning until midnight.
Oh, wow.
Right, and then the long morning watch, midnight till 8, you're off watch, and you're not back on again until the afternoon watch, but at 8 o'clock in the morning, you're back to work on the upper deck, doing ship's husbandry, maintenance, and so on and so on. So watch keeping sucked. So I said to myself, okay, what can I do where there's no watch keeping, where there's no what you call a part of the ship that you're responsible for the maintenance and upkeep of, and where I can be in bed every night. There's a trade in the Royal Navy. It's still called writer, and it comes from the way back when being able to write was actually very, very rare, and each ship would have a writer whose job it was to maintain the ship's records and do the captain's correspondence and so on and so on. And the name had stuck all the way through the 20th century. And basically it was administration, personnel records, all that sort of stuff. Work in the ship's office, very, very small group of you, usually 1 petty officer or chief, 1 leading rate, and 2 able rates. So there's only 4 of you, plus another one working in the technical office, but they came under the control of the Marine Engineering Department. And that was it. And because there were so few of you, you tended to get a lot more responsibility. And you didn't have to work on the upper deck, chipping and painting in the rain and the cold and the snow, and you were in bed every night. So I thought, yep, that sounds like the job for me. And by a lucky coincidence, I was actually pretty good at it and really enjoyed it. My action station was first aid team. So usually in either the forward or the aft first aid post, reacting to, thankfully, simulation only, never real ones, sucking chest wounds and electrocutions and burns and all that sort of stuff. So that was it. That's what I did.
Very nice. Were you on cruisers or frigates?
Frigates and destroyers. Although destroyers these days aren't what you would...
No, they're much larger, much larger. Yeah. I think our Arleigh Burke class destroyers are probably double the size that like a Fletcher class was back then. So
yeah, they're cruiser sized. I mean, I served on Type 22 frigates, which were big. I mean, a frigate, I think, would probably be classed as a destroyer escort back in World War II.
yeah.
You know, well, a Type 22 frigate is huge. Served on those when I was a radio operator, and then when I branch transferred to writer, mostly served in Portsmouth-based ships, and there's not a lot other than Type 42 destroyers at the time in Portsmouth. There were some Type 23 frigates as well, but basically just Type 42s. So my first ship was HMS Brazen, followed by HMS Coventry. Oh, funny story about the ships I've been on, which we'll come to once I finish listing them. First ship was HMS Brazen, followed by HMS Coventry. They were both Type 22 frigates, and then I moved to Portsmouth. I spent a few months on board HMS Marlborough, which was a Type 22 frigate, only when it was in refit in Plymouth. Then when I was Portsmouth-based, various different Type 42 destroyers, HMS Manchester, Newcastle, Southampton, Nottingham.
I'll be honest.
Yeah.
I love the names that the England uses for their ships. I really do. Like you've got the Victory. You've got what was the first one you mentioned? The Brazen. Yeah, just those courageous, valorous type names. It's just like
broadsword class frigates.
Yeah,
the first one in class was HMS Broadsword.
Yeah,
Broadsword, Battle Axe, Brazen.
We name ours after places, and you all choose these cool names, and then
you tend to what an American ship is by its name, though, because you've got these naming conventions, don't you? It's a battleship, it's named after a state.
Yep.
If it's a cruiser, it's normally named after a person.
Destroyers now are usually people, courageous acts, that type of thing.
Yeah, cruisers at the time were named after cities.
Places, cities, Lake Champlain, that type of thing. Yeah.
You never really got behind the whole heavy cruiser concept, but you had a couple of names reserved for heavy cruisers, and they were going to be territories like Guam, or I'm trying to think of another one, but I can't. Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
Oh, excuse me. We tend to, because we reuse the same names. Obviously, you do as well.
Yeah.
Ours have been getting reused for a little bit longer than yours have. So
quite a little while longer.
Yeah. So while we're on that subject of the ships that I was on, so HMS Brazen ended up running aground off the coast of South America somewhere.
Oh, God.
HMS Coventry, which was, I think, the seventh ship of that name to be commissioned in the Royal Navy. There had never been an HMS Coventry that hadn't either been sunk or captured by the enemy. My next ship, HMS Southampton, had previously wrapped itself around the bows of a supertanker.
Oh my gosh, I'm seeing a trend here.
Yeah. After I left HMS Nottingham, it managed to run itself aground and tear the bottom out of the ship, doing £65 million of damage to it off Wolf Rock in the sea between Australia and New Zealand. So by the time I joined HMS Newcastle, I dare say the ship's company were getting very, very nervous at the idea that I was coming on board.
Oh, man, that is funny.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a good thing you retired, right?
Yeah, probably just in time. Yeah.
Just in time. So this question, now that I think of it, I think it's a little obvious. It's obvious that you being in the Navy has probably enhanced your love of World of Warships, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Now, do you obviously, I think everyone that plays World of Warships considers himself a historian in some way, shape, or another, or at least the vast majority of us. So. Yeah, I hope so. Do you prefer a certain time period in naval history more than the others? Are you World War II, or are you more of Napoleonic Wars, Master and Commander type?
Yeah, I probably, being British and the Battle of the Nile, the Battle of Trafalgar, I probably should say the Napoleonic Wars, and I know I'm going to get crucified for this, but I actually prefer reading about the US Navy and World War II in the Pacific.
Well, who doesn't? I mean,
for a number of reasons, mostly to do with well, I don't know if you've ever read about. There's a book by James D. Hornfisher called Neptune's Inferno.
I'm 2/3 the way through it right now. Phenomenal book, along with Last Stand of the Tin Can Sailors.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Both phenomenal books.
But what impressed me, and this was true of the U.S. Army and the Navy in World War II, was at the beginning, you didn't have a clue.
No, not at all.
Not one. Most of what you were doing wrong. But by God, you learned fast.
Very, very fast. And it cost a lot of lives to learn that way.
Yeah.
But they did.
But you very rarely repeated the same mistake twice. And this was something that you saw in the U.S. Army as well when they arrived in North Africa in 1942, tail end of 1942, beginning of 1943 with Operation Torch. Obsolete weapons, 37mm anti-tank guns. Nobody bothered telling them that they couldn't actually penetrate the armor of a Panzer with a 37mm anti-tank gun. Not a lot of training. A lot of people still using First World War weapons. But the sheer number of combat lessons learned reports that were being generated by divisional command, very, very learned very quickly. Very rarely made the same mistake twice. And if you just read through the Naval Battle of Guadalcanal, which lasted 6 months, and the popular myth is that the Navy abandoned the Marines on Guadalcanal.
No.
And there's some truth to that, but at the same time, the Navy lost 5 sailors for every 3 Marines who were lost ashore. And when you read through, actually, I think the figures might be worse than that. I'm not entirely sure, but that more sailors lost their lives during the Battle of Guadalcanal than Marines did. And I'm not trying to belittle what the Marines.
No, not at all.
Their story is just unbelievable as well. But if you read, starting with the night action off Savo Island, where the US cruiser force barely even got a shot off and just got decimated.
Just obliterated.
Yeah. And wow. And then you go forward 6 months and see how, and it was just in the space of 6 months, you couldn't be beaten. That was the turning point.
Well, one of the things also that I've learned through reading about it was we weren't afraid to get rid of ineffective leaders either.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We wouldn't do that. You guys, absolutely. Because the vast majority. I mean, at the start of World War II, there were only about 60,000 people in the U.S. Army, and most of those were still entrenched in World War I style tactics and so on and so on. And you went from that in the space of something like 6 months to 1 million men under arms.
Yep.
And what was the name of the U.S. Chief of Staff? Was it Marshall? Because he basically, Ike was his guy.
Yeah.
And Ike had never commanded troops in battle. I don't know if you were aware of that. But he was superb on planning, training, and diplomacy. And Marshall repeatedly told Ike in North Africa, if you have an officer under your command, whether that be a corps, army, or division level, I'm going to take it for granted that because he is still under your command, it means you're satisfied with his performance. If you are not satisfied with anybody's performance, get rid of them.
Well, that's how
I find it really hard to do that.
That's how Halsey came into command. Nimitz had lost he'd lost confidence in who he had in place, and he sent Halsey in, and the instant Halsey came in, we went from holding our aircraft carriers into reserve and not pushing them into putting them on the forefront. Halsey wasn't afraid to use his resources, and he wasn't afraid for them to get sunk, but in the same sense, he wasn't cavalier either. I mean, he was smart.
No.
He was smart.
He took chances, but they were calculated.
Yeah. And he was a morale boost for his troops. He comes in with a swagger, wearing a leather jacket and everything, and the instant the troops saw him, they're just like, yeah, this is my leader right here. I'm going to follow. Yeah, and that was the turning point, I think, in Guadalcanal. So, yeah. We could probably...
I think you're probably right.
We could probably talk about... World War II naval history and history in general for hours.
You give me half a chance and I will.
Yeah. Absolutely. Love it.
One of Halsey's quotes that and it summarizes everything you need to know about the guy. When it was suggested to him that they could share the Pacific with Japan. Have you heard this one?
I might not have.
Halsey's reply was, "Sure, we'll share the Pacific with the Japanese. We'll take the top half. They can take the bottom half."
That sounds about right. That sounds very.
I was him
right.
through and through.
Yeah, and just an incredible man who's coming to the game. It's nice.
He is, yes.
Yeah, very nice to see him making an appearance in World of Warships. So I'm definitely going to make a concerted effort to unlock him. So, what historical warship would you most have wanted to have served on?
You know, again, this kind of goes back to the question that you asked me earlier, because you know the names of all of these great ships.
Mm-hmm.
You mostly know the names because of the horrific battles they were involved in.
Exactly.
I would like to have served on one that survived, so that rules out the USS Atlanta.
Yeah, so basically a U.S. battleship, you know, Iowa, Missouri, one of those.
I'm thinking Missouri, because I think I would have really loved to have seen the Japanese surrender.
As long as USS Porter isn't around. Was it the Missouri that almost got accidentally
William
torn
D. Porter?
Yeah.
It was carrying the president at the time. I think it was the Iowa.
Was it the Iowa? It was one of them. It was one of them. So.
Oh wait, no, it was the Missouri, because that was the only one to have a bathroom on it, because FDR couldn't stand up in a shower because he was in a wheelchair, so they built a bath into his quarters. So yeah, it must have been the Missouri.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I would probably have wanted to been on something safe. And fortunately, I've been on 2 out of the 4 Iowas now. I've seen the Wisconsin, haven't made it out to Hawaii. But, you know, living in England, my parents took me all over the place. And even as a kid, I remember going to see the HMS Victory. And, this is where who was it? Nelson passed away? Yeah, this is where Nelson passed away.
This spot here, that's where he died, right there. And it's just this horrible, dark, dingy
in the
corner
bottom
of the guts of the ship.
Yeah. And that goes along with what you're saying, you know, how Navy had it rough in World War II. Navy's always had it rough. Steel on steel does not do good things to body. Steel on wood does not do good things to body. I mean, looking now, I always thought it would be safest to be in the Navy, and I'm like, man, I think I would have wanted. I think I would have wanted to be in the Army in World War II. I'd take my chances in a foxhole.
It's funny you should say that. The 20th anniversary of the Falklands War, I was in the Falklands on HMS Newcastle for part of we were South Atlantic Guardship at the time, and so we were detailed to go down and take part in the ceremonies for the 20th anniversary. So there was all kinds of remembrance parades and all that sort of stuff. But while I was down there, we took the opportunity to get a battlefield tour of Goose Green, because the resident infantry company down the Falklands at the time were the 3rd Parachute Battalion, 3 Para. And the major who was organising and lecturing on the battlefield tour of Goose Green, we couldn't have had a better guide, because 20 years prior to that, Major Tom Abel of 3 Para was Corporal Tom Abel of 2 Para and fought at Goose Green. So he was there telling us, right, over here, that's where our radio operator caught one. Most of our NCOs had been shot here. We were pinned down by trenches over there, because he was there. You know, he saw it.
Yeah.
And at the end of the whole thing, I said to him, "Sir, I think I speak for every sailor here when I say I have no idea how you soldiers did the job that you did." And he said, "You know, it's funny you should say that, because when we were all lying in our scrape holes with tracer fire flying over our heads and mortars lying all around us, you could look out, and a couple of miles away there's San Carlos water, and all you could see was Skyhawks going overhead, anti-aircraft fire going off, and ships blowing up. And we were sitting here thinking, I don't know how the hell those sailors do the job they do." Grass is always greener.
It's interesting.
or not.
I think today, right as we're recording this is actually the day that the General Belgrano was sunk back in the Falklands. Someone
2nd of May.
Yeah, 2nd of May.
Yes, you're right. It was.
Look at that.
By HMS Conqueror. You know what the General Belgrano was?
Yeah, it was a Brooklyn class. It was the USS Phoenix.
Yeah, that survived Pearl Harbor.
It's so sad to see it go to Argentina and get sunk. I mean, I'm sure you all are glad it was sunk, but you know, a part of me is like, oh.
There was a fantastically tasteless headline in a British tabloid newspaper called The Sun that came out as soon as it was announced that the Belgrano had been sunk, and it was just a picture taken through the periscope of HMS Courageous of the ship going down, and it just said, "Gotcha." And I mean, these are men's lives.
Mm-hmm.
You know, hundreds of Argentine, and they'd been deserted by their escorts.
Yeah.
2 destroyers that didn't come back because they were afraid they were going to get torpedoed as well. And just no, if you're picking sailors up out of the water, we're not going to torpedo you.
Yeah.
But they didn't want to risk it, and so hundreds died completely unnecessarily.
It's
It was an attack that needed to happen, but
Right.
you've got to regret the loss of life associated with it.
absolutely, and that kind of reminds me of a scene from Das Boot, which is probably one of my favorite naval war movies. And it's that scene where, you know, they had just torpedoed the convoy. They have to dive because they're getting pursued by destroyers. And once they finally made it to safety, they surface back and they see one of the ships on fire, so they fire another torpedo, and then, you know, you've got sailors jumping out, and, you know, the crew, you go back and you look at the crew, and they're starting to cry because they know they can't take any on board as they're slowly backing up, which it was nice because it also highlights the humanity of Germany at the time, because, you know, propaganda and everything, you like to show, you know, they're all Nazis, highly patriotic. Not all Germans were Nazis. All Nazis were German, but not all Germans were Nazis. So this
at the time, it was traditional in movies to show anybody who was German had to have a big scar on his face, swastika on his arm, and spoke like this.
Yep.
Because, you know, all Germans are bad guys according to Hollywood at the time, and Das Boot was one of the ones that tried to, you know. There were others, certainly, but Das Boot's probably the most famous of the period that tried to show, well, you know, they were just people fighting on both sides.
They didn't want to see anyone die. It was just a job that had to happen. So
that was their duty.
Yeah. So let's move on to some more, I guess, not optimistic, but just a little more, you know, positive things. Not talk about war and too much of that going on. So let's talk about some warships related stuff. What's your favorite ship in game right now? Because I know it changes from time to time with everyone. I know
it kind of does. I mean, at the moment, I'm loving, while it's still tier 6, USS Cleveland. But I mean, I really loved the Cleveland back in the closed beta test. And then they kind of nerfed it a little, and I didn't like it as much. Now I'm kind of loving it again.
Got nerfed heavily.
But I think the one ship that I have consistently loved all the way through is the Tier 4 Japanese destroyer, the Isukazu. Because its torpedoes are awesome. It's fast.
Yep.
It can stealth torp, although not by much, but it can. And the guns, very surprisingly, don't suck.
Nope. It's funny. It's funny you mention that ship because back when I first started playing, I was probably still under 1,000, maybe even 750 games. I accidentally failed division in the Isukazu and wound up with.
Doesn't really matter. Does it?
I wound up with tier 8 ships, and I got a Kraken against tier 8 ships. I was like, what is going on here?
The torpedo reload is so fast on that thing. It doesn't fire a lot of torpedoes at once. I think the most it can put in the water is 6 at any one time. But it only takes like 30 seconds to reload.
And the detection's what, sub 5? I mean, so
I know.
It held its own. I was like, I can see that being a very favorite ship. So
yeah, it's great. Don't tell anybody because they'll nerf it. Okay?
No, exactly.
We'll edit this bit out.
That's the running joke, right? Wargaming hears a ship's good, so they nerf it. So that doesn't happen a lot. All right. So what are you most pleased that Wargaming has implemented in World of Warships in the past few years?
Achievements for things that aren't directly damage related, which was something that, I mean, they'd been working on this because Flamu, who you may know and be aware of almost certainly.
Yeah, I think I've heard of him. I've heard of him.
Fairly prominent World of Warships live streamer. Does the occasional, tournament presentation and so on and so on. Brought this up in a video, and then I picked up on it and also, talked about it. And then when we went to St. Petersburg, lo and behold, oh, look what's coming out in the next patch. Now, obviously, they've been working on this for some time.
Yeah.
It wasn't just as a reaction to what myself and Flammu had been saying, but the fact that here's the thing about a game: if there's a way that you think your players should be playing a certain game or a certain unit in a game, the only way you can't make them play a ship in the way that you as a developer thinks that ship should be played.
No.
But you can encourage them to do it by giving them positive feedback when they're doing things that you think are good, either for them or for their team, and giving them negative feedback when they're doing things that they really probably shouldn't be doing. And all World of Warships was doing, up until patch 0.74, was rewarding people for doing damage and sinking ships. Now, that's not a bad thing, because at the end of the day, you really should be doing damage and sinking ships.
That's how you
there's
win.
so much more to it. Yeah, there's so much more to it. And a lot of the other stuff that was vital, spotting, capping, when somebody gets a Kraken, everybody knows about it. It's there in battle chat. Kraken Unleashed. When somebody gets a devastating strike, everybody knows about it. When somebody gets it's just a flesh wound, everybody knows about it. But if you've done 1 million spotting damage, nobody knows about it until after the battle. Right? While you're playing, if you don't know any better, there's no feedback given to you to let you know that you're doing a good thing here by spotting ships for your team. And patch 0.74 brought that and all sorts of other things in, which I think is it's not one of the sexy things to talk about.
No.
It's not.
It's important.
It's not like British battleships.
No.
It's not new Italian premium cruisers, but I think it's one of the most important changes that they've made
for the unsung heroes. And for the longest time, I'd been saying, like, when you cap, I had wanted to see something like an achievement. If you cap 3 caps, you get an achievement called Hat Trick or something that just pops up there, and hey, congrats, you did something vital to the game, vital to your team, and here's your attaboy for everyone to know. So
Just don't make it so that everybody knows, because I thought that was a fantastic idea as well. And somebody pointed out in the comments of the video, let's say there's 2 destroyers left on your team, and somebody in a cruiser on the enemy team wants to know where those 2 destroyers are. And then suddenly an achievement pops up saying, NoZoupForYou just got the hat trick. And he looks, and he realizes which of the caps just changed color, and now he knows exactly where you are.
That's a good point.
So maybe not announce that to the entire.
That's a good point as well. I didn't look at it that way, but that is a very good point. So this kind of leads into the next question, which might answer that. It might not. What are you most upset that has or has not been implemented in the game? I know a lot of people.
British destroyers. Where are my British destroyers?
There we go.
Also, that's what they haven't put into the game yet. And also, UK battleship, absolutely absurd fire chance with the high explosive shells. I don't think that was a good thing for the game.
Yeah, as I'm playing Conqueror in ranked right now, which I really hadn't played up to this point, and I still, and I know people have given me flack over it, I still contend it's not overpowered. It's just a pain in the rear and unnecessary. It just promotes the wrong style of play for battleships.
Because 75% of the damage that you do with the Conqueror, if you're firing high explosive, is fire damage. High explosive damage probably accounts for 25% of the damage that you do, but fire damage can all be healed. It's trash damage. All of that damage, and again, this is going back to the previous question, people in Conquerors getting easily doing 200,000 damage in a game.
But it's repaired.
Meaningless.
It's all repaired. It's all battleship.
Unless you're sinking the target that you're shooting at, it's just stat padding nonsense.
Well, and that's why a ship like the Des Moines will always be better than the Zao, in my opinion, because the Zao's the same way. You set fires, you run around, you try not to get hit, where the Des Moines actually, you're in there and you've got great AP and you've got radar, you're helping your team. So it's that carrying ability that some ships have and some don't. So, yeah.
I played a clan battle in the Des Moines. I run the Des Moines with the reload mod and with Adrenaline Rush. And I had my Des Moines on 20% health, and the guns were firing every 2.4 seconds.
Oh, it's a glorious thing. Can you imagine the Wooster with that also? Oh my gosh, it's going to be glorious.
Full health Hindenburg came around the corner, and he was dead within 8 seconds.
So aside from British destroyers. What one thing would you really like to see added into the game at some point?
You know, I'd like to see British aircraft carriers. I know I'm going Britain, 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 but British aircraft carriers were different from Japanese and American aircraft carriers. They weren't as big. They couldn't carry as many aircraft, but they had armored decks.
So
they didn't take as much damage from kamikazes as the American carriers did.
While you were in St. Petersburg, and I really wished I could have met everyone out there, but I had a vacation planned that precluded me from going. Malta was one of my stops, and our taxi our taxi driver, who had served in the Royal Air Force, he was in Malta, joined the Royal Air Force, came back, and now drives taxis. He spoke to me about 15 minutes, just brought it up on his loan, the HMS Illustrious, and just how it was the unsinkable aircraft carrier, and how Malta got the George Cross, and it is a huge point of pride for the country of Malta, the fact that the Royal Navy is that ingrained with their history.
Not anymore, of course.
Not anymore, but you speaking about aircraft carriers just kind of triggered that, because the Germans threw everything they had while it was in Malta, and they could not sink it.
Yep, that's correct. Armored decks, you see, and the way ahead.
So how do you find the current health of World of Warships, both the community and content? I personally think things are going good. We're getting a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I mean, the game's not perfect. There are things that nobody's ever happy, but I don't think there's as much to complain about in World of Warships as there is in World of Tanks, for example.
Right.
Excuse me, sorry. I think that we got a better community, although maybe that's just because of the size. I mean, World of Tanks is obviously much, much bigger than
World of Warships. Absolutely.
But I made the point when people ask me why I played World of Tanks. World of Tanks is a first-person shooter for old people, for people with slow reflexes. And you could say World of Warships is it's not third-person shooter for people who are so crap that they can't even keep up with the pace of World of Tanks.
I'm not as twitchy as I used to be in gameplay, but World of Warships is relaxing.
Now, I need to add a caveat to that, because I'm not saying that people are so crap that they can't do World of Tanks and keep up the pace of that they play World of Warships, but I think it's definitely true that you get a more mature audience playing World of Warships than you do World of Tanks. Not 100% across the board. There are, angry kids playing World of Warships as well, but there's a lot more of them playing World of Tanks. I think the nature of the subject and the nature of and slower paced nature of the gameplay doesn't really cater to the twitch reflex generation, the short attention span, younger generation, and I think you get a more certainly older. I mean, my audience is a lot older than
the average age of the World of Warships player. Wargaming told me a while back, someone within Wargaming is 42. So
that sounds exactly right, and I think that might have. I mean, there are a lot of 42-year-old assholes out there as
absolutely.
Well. But on the whole, they tend to be a bit more patient.
I want to be one of those 70-year-old type when I get to that age. So, but no,
I'm not that far away.
Oh, come on now. So,
hey, I'll be happy if I'm still playing games when I'm 70.
Oh, so will I. I'll be very happy. So we've already said you went to St. Petersburg. After going there and seeing things behind the scenes, how excited for the future of World of Warships are you? You started. Okay, good. You started. I got a little worried there for a second.
No, it's sorry, I got something stuck in my throat here. First and foremost, meeting the developers. I mean, St. Petersburg itself was amazing, but that's just St. Petersburg. It's always been the more cosmopolitan of the Soviet. Sorry, well, at one point Soviet, but Russian cities. Yep. But meeting the developers and speaking to them and listening to them and understanding how they think and what they're trying to do. I mean, they don't have to detail everything about what they're trying to do for World of Warships for you to get an idea just by listening to the way that they talk and the subjects that they talk about and how they talk about them, to read between the lines and get an idea of what their vision for the game is going to be. That was encouraging, but also, and I need to be careful here because I could drop myself in there. The carrier rebalance.
Yeah.
I can't comment on what I've seen because I'd get into trouble. But I can comment on what they have talked about.
Well, in the water line, yeah, with Felipe.
The waterline video.
Yeah.
Where you'll only ever control one squadron at a time. What they're trying to do, because at the moment, I mean, there are people that love playing aircraft carriers in World War.
It's a small community, though.
Yeah. There are probably 30 people who are very good at playing aircraft carriers in World of Warships, and they're probably not going to like what Wargaming... It's not what Wargaming are doing. One of the things that Wargaming are trying. It's not necessarily going to happen this way, but I'd be very surprised if something like what they showed us isn't the way it eventually goes, because it's like playing two different games. There's nearly no commonality between playing a destroyer, cruiser, battleship, and playing an aircraft.
Not at all.
You know, you could have two people who are both World of Warships players. One of them just plays carriers, and the other one never plays carriers, and neither of them would have much of a clue of how the other person plays the game. But they're both World of Warships players. So that's what they're trying to erase. They're trying to have it so that even if you've never played a carrier before, having played battleships, cruisers, and destroyers, you will have some idea of how to control the gameplay when you jump into an aircraft carrier. And I think, because they've obviously been trying to look at a number of different ways for trying to narrow the skill gap between the 30 or so people who know how to play aircraft carriers and everybody else. Trying to get rid of that skill gap, while still at the same time ensuring that there's enough of a skill ceiling in there that there's still space for people who are very good at carriers, but they're not going to be so amazingly better than everybody else, purely because they have played StarCraft 2 in the Korean Super League and can execute 200 mouse clicks a second.
So you know, it's I don't know what they said in St. Petersburg, and I don't know what they showed you, and I only have Waterline to go off of, and what both Phil and Phil have said. But one of the things that just struck me, and what I feel is a natural progression, and the need to kind of progress carriers towards what they said is, you look at World of Tanks, they eventually went to Xbox and PlayStation 4. I would think if World of Warships has any aspirations whatsoever to move to console, they've got to change carriers for that reason, because you cannot play you cannot play carriers the way they're played now on a console. I mean, I've tried playing Command and Conquer back in the day when it came out on PlayStation, and it was after playing it on a computer, it was nothing but frustration. I don't.
Now, I cannot possibly confirm or deny any rumors about whether or not World of Warships is coming to console. But, my phone just went off. Never mind. I'll check later. But while I cannot possibly confirm or deny any of those rumors, I can say that what they have currently undergoing prototyping for carriers would work very, very well on a joypad.
Very nice. I like hearing that. Not that I would ever play Warships on console. I'm kind of invested in PC, but that opens it up, the class, at least, if they ever make that transition. So,
and I think this is probably the reason why we haven't seen British aircraft carriers, or anybody else's aircraft carriers for that matter, because they don't want to put a new line of aircraft carriers in until they've fixed aircraft carrier gameplay.
Well, unfortunately, like you said, British aircraft carriers didn't hold that much, but when you're only flying one squadron at a time, it doesn't really matter if they hold a lot or not. So,
exactly. Yeah.
All right. Moving on to one last question. What one piece of advice would you give to all players?
Chill out, guys. Seriously.
I love that. I'm so glad you said that.
It's only a game. Why you have to be mad? And it is. You see, it doesn't happen as much. I mean, it kind of does, I suppose. You see people losing it in chat because somebody hasn't a nice backup team. Well, if you want to sail 20 kilometers away from the rest of the team and go wandering into a cat by yourself, when your minimap works just as well as ours does, you can see that you're going off on your own. If you choose to do that, don't blame the rest of the team. If the team is lemming training off in one direction, teamwork is vastly underrated. Right? If everybody's doing the wrong thing, it's better that you all do the wrong thing together than two-thirds of you do the wrong thing, and a third of you try to do the right thing when you're doomed to failure and hopelessly outnumbered. And even if it all goes horribly wrong, it's just a game. At the very worst, you've wasted 20 minutes of your life. Just if it annoys you so much, just drink a glass of water, maybe a fruit cup, try some breathing exercises.
This sounds like a video I did about a week or two ago. Yeah, it's just, if it aggravates you that much, move on to something else, or come back when you've calmed down. But yeah, no, I agree with you.
And you ragging at your teammates doesn't do anything positive. It might make you feel momentarily better.
Like drivers on the motorway. See, I use British vernacular right there.
But your team isn't going to suddenly stop sucking just because you're angry at them.
No.
And if you have anything positive to say, they're probably less likely to listen to it and consider it if the first thing that you do is, oh my God, noob team. That is probably just going to get you added to their blacklist. So any further constructive information you have to give, they're not even going to hear. I realise that the first thing that we want to do when people piss us off is to rage at them. And it's very easy to do when there are no immediate consequences. Nobody gets punched in the face over the internet, for example. But just chill out, guys. That's all I'm saying.
So there you have it from the mighty one. Chill out. Paul, Mr. Jingles, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to have this little interview with me. I'm sure my viewers appreciate it. And it's been great getting to know you a little better, a little more than I did before. So once again, just thank you so much. And, all the best in your future Warships endeavors and YouTube endeavors for that in general, and streaming, because you do that a lot too. So a man, multi-dimensional man.
I wouldn't say I stream a lot. I think it's been more than a month since I last
streamed, really?
but I do occasionally do it.
We'll say
I've been so lazy.
Oh, well, you're entitled to that. You're retired, right?
Exactly. I'm an old man.
So once again, Paul, thank you so much. And thank you all out there, and stay tuned for more stuff in the future.
Thank you very much for having me. And as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.